Okay, everybody, good evening, and welcome back to Exploring the Lord of the Rings. Tonight is an exciting night because it is session number 100 of Exploring the Lord of the Rings, our centennial gathering. And of course, I'm sure that you all would have predicted that we would be celebrating session 100 while Frodo is still in bed at the beginning of many meetings. It's all good. So, I've been gone for a week and back now. So first announcement I want to make is that I'm back and everything's back to normal. So all the normal broadcasts are back up and happening this week. Exploring the Lord of the Rings tonight, of course. Tomorrow night, Mythgard Academy. So that's going to be happening. It's going to be our penultimate session on Sir Thomas Malory. It's going to be the final session on the text this coming week. And then the week after that, we're going to be talking about Monty Python and the Holy Grail in light of our discussion, our 35-week discussion of Sir Thomas Malory. So that's happening this Wednesday, our last text discussion of Malory. And then on Friday, I'll be doing my Grifflet stream and another Film episode. So lots of stuff happening this week. All the back to all my usual stuff. So let's see, what else was it that I was gonna? And we have an announcement tonight, which is really cool. So we have a new thing that we're doing this year. You might have heard rumors about this in social media already, but in case you haven't. So this year we're doing a new thing at Mythmoot. So Mythmoot, of course, our big annual conference every year. It's in Leesburg, Virginia, right near the Dulles Airport in Northern Virginia. It is an awesome time. It's a 4-day conference. Starts Thursday night, goes through Sunday. And I look forward to this every year. It's like the highlight of the year for me every year. We do lots of really fun stuff. I encourage you, if you can possibly make it down, there's still plenty of time to enroll. If you want to register and come down and hang out with us, it is awesome. And we get a lot of Lotro people, a lot of people from Exploring the Lord of the Rings. It's a sort of the biggest, most central gathering of all of our community together, and it's always a wonderful time. However, I also know that a lot of people can't make it. It's too far away, travel is impractical, or whatever. You just can't do it, and so you end up missing out. And people have been asking for a long time, is there a way that we can do it? So we finally, last year, we were kind of experimenting. We streamed a few things as we were kind of feeling out the tech and working out the streaming and the hardware and everything else and the location, trying to make sure we get everything together. So we were sort of doing that last year as a kind of proof of concept, and we're ready to roll it out this year. So the idea is we have a new form of registration for Mythmoot this year, which we're calling Mootcast. So let me introduce that to you if you haven't seen it here. So for everybody who can't attend in person, what this is going to be is live streaming of every session in every room at Mythmoot. So everything that's going on in the main room, all the plenary sessions, all of the discussion panels in all of the rooms at once. You know, when you go to conferences and we're splitting up into 3 different concurrent sessions, and you're looking at the schedule and you're like, man, how can I choose which one to be in? I want to go to them all, right? Well, now you can, right? Because we're going to get live feeds from all of these, but also not only can you have to, of course, pick only one to be in live at the same time. I guess in theory, you could show up live in 3 different devices and all 3 of them at once, but that'd be a little bit more multitasking than I personally am capable of. But anyway, I'm not gonna assume everyone's as limited as I am. But the point is, in addition to live participation at any of the ones that you choose, you also can you'll get access to full archive videos of everything, right? Now, one thing that I would want to emphasize, if you're attending Mythmoot, right, if you're able to come even just for a day, you get Mootcast built into that, right? So you will get access to the full recorded videos of all of the sessions, right? So anyway, that's all going to be part of the package there. So this is a new thing for us. So if you go to the Mythmoot page, this is signumuniversity.org. So I'm going to make sure I get the thing right. Yeah, /Mythmoot/Mootcast. And you can see on this page, there's the whole description of how Mootcast works and the whole FAQ page down at the bottom. So I hope that you'll be able to find any information that you need there on Mootcast. I'm really excited for this opportunity. This is something I've been really wanting to do for a long time. So anyhow, it's gonna be great. Yeah, there's gonna be Mad Violinist, there's going to be a few cameras involved. We should only need 3 because we're only doing, we're never doing more than 3 concurrent sessions at a time. So the majority of the stuff is going to be happening in one room. We're going to be using GoToWebinar, which is the classroom NetMoot feature that we use, the program that we've been using at Signum for almost 8 years now. We're going to be broadcasting on our different GoToWebinar channels. So how it will work, register for Mootcast, and then of course we will have you listed as registered for Mootcast right before the conference begins. Not like instantly before the conference begins, but like a little while before the conference begins. We'll send you links. Okay, we'll send you links to the different rooms, and we'll show you how it fits in with the schedule and everything else, right? So you know which channel to go to, which link to click on at what time, right, for which thing. So we'll show you all that, so that you can access any of the ones that you want to. Anyway, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it's basically all you have to do is just sign up to register for Mythmoot, and there's a Mootcast option now. It's basically just another registration option. So anyway, that's pretty simple, right? But pretty exciting. This is something I've been hoping for. We've been working towards it now actively for a few years, and I'm excited to see us roll this out this year. So really glad to make this available. So happy to share that with you guys. All right. And I think that's mostly what I wanted to cover. Oh, last thing. Mythgard Academy, I had mentioned that we're finishing the Mallory class in the next 2 weeks, so that next week, May 8th, will be the absolute final session. It's going to be number 35 or 36 of the Mallory class. After almost a year, we're completely done with Mallory after next week, which means we are on to our next book immediately afterwards on Wednesday the 15th, and that is going to be Sauron Defeated, Volume 9 of the History of Middle-earth. Back to the History of Middle-earth as we continue our series through there. Sauron Defeated has many treats in store. It's the end of the first part is the end of the history of the Lord of the Rings. So looking at the sort of the final stages of the manuscript process there, including, of course, the unpublished epilogue of the Lord of the Rings that Tolkien had originally included, which is always fun. And then, of course, the primary piece in the middle of the Sauron Defeated volume, which is the primary piece, which is the Notion Club Papers, of course. His return to the whole time travel, Atlantis, Numenor stuff, and then we get some more Numenor stuff at the end after that. The Notion Club Papers are really, really, really interesting. So yeah, it's if you've never read them before, you absolutely should. As always, of course, you don't have to, we're in volume 9. You can just jump in and join us at volume 9 if you like. It'll be okay. There's 8 more volumes of discussion, of course, that we've been doing over the last several years, which you can go back and follow before that. But in any case, you don't have to. you can jump in and go current with us here on Volume 9, starting on the 15th of May. The schedule and the registration link will be up soon, later this week. So that's coming. All right. Hey, JJ's teasing me about exploring the death of Arthur. You know, we've gone pretty quickly. I mean, yes, it's been 35 classes, but you know, this is we've done 700 pages of Middle English, right? You know, that's pretty rapid coverage, really, especially by exploring the Lord of the Rings standards. So anyhow, all right. And by the way, one last little kind of teaser. I've been discussing this week. This is something I think I've mentioned this before. You guys probably, I know many of you know the other wonderful Tolkien podcast called the Prancing Pony podcast. I've been talking with the Prancing Pony guys, who are really wonderful guys, and I've gotten to, we had them at Mythmoot last year. They're really awesome, and of course they're doing a discussion of their way through the Lord of the Rings at what seems to me a heady and entirely reckless pace. But we were kind of joking about the fact they came to Texmoot as well this year, and so I was down. I saw them again at Texmoot, and we were talking then about the fact that sometime during the course of this calendar year, our podcasts were going to cross. Right, they were going to catch up, of course, because they're going faster than we are, and we figured that we'd probably catch up somewhere around the Council of Elrond. So. We've been talking about doing a joint episode. It's probably not going to be literally a joint episode because what we do is very different. But what we're thinking is that we're probably going to do a kind of exchange where they'll come and they'll join me for an Exploring the Lord of the Rings session, and I will join them for one of their sessions at around the same time there as we're both in the Council of Elrond. So. That's gonna be awesome. So it's in the offing, unlikely to happen until like later this year, but it's gonna be exactly a special crossover event. It's gonna be very cool. So I'm really looking forward to that little collaboration and get their perspective on the Council of Elrond. I think that's assuming we make it through many meetings by October, November, right? So, we'll see. Fingers crossed. You never know. But that'll probably happen. So anyway, so just to let you know, that's another thing that's kind of in discussion. So, Mad Violinist, yeah, it's so funny when I'm talking to them. Like they're so organized. Holy cow! Like Alan has everything planned out like way in advance and everything, and I'm just like, yeah, no, that's exactly how I roll too. But anyhow, Trifle, that's exactly it. We do have a couple poems coming up in this chapter, so that's why I'm I just said, let's wait and see where we are in the text before we get there. Anyhow, let us move on, because speaking of moving slowly through the text, a whole lot of really great discussion has been happening on the discussion board in the Questions for Narnian section of our Exploring the Lord of the Rings discussion board, and I wanted to come to a few of those. Now, I'm going to, with some regret, going to resist the temptation to go backwards over things, but several things that came up over this. Of course, you guys have had 2 weeks to post, so that always helps too. Just in response to some of the things we've been talking about in the last couple sessions. So let me get to some of those today. I don't know how much of the primary text we're going to get to cover today. Maybe only a few sentences, but hey, that's how we roll. So without further ado, let me move ahead to... So this is from Wyatt Eichholtz, which I had kind of reserved until after we talked about the discussion we had at the end. So I want to read this, and this will kind of help me sort of refresh my own memory of our discussion from last time and kind of get back into things, because I wanted to respond to this after we had talked about that passage. A fascinating aspect of The Lord of the Rings is its description of the Wraith world. The blurry vision and wraith perception depicted in the films doesn't come close to the true nature of the Wraith world, as we have noted. At first I was more likely to imagine it like the Upside Down from Stranger Things, a parallel corrupted universe that the ring bearer can phase into or out of at will. By the way, I think that's a really fascinating parallel, and although I hadn't made that connection myself, I hadn't been thinking about it in terms of the Upside Down, I actually think once Wyatt brought that up, the question of like the Wraith world, and for if you haven't seen Netflix Stranger Things series, you won't know what I'm talking about, but I know most of you have probably. What I was realizing when Wyatt brought that up, I had never thought about the Upside Down when I was reading Tolkien, but I think that Tolkien's depiction of the Wraith world had been kind of influencing how I was receiving the Upside Down when I was watching Stranger Things, especially in the first season of Stranger Things, where there's the creature, right, who's like not normally, there's the question of like the dubious visibility or appearance of the creature, right? Where can you really see it and everything, and the way in which there's this like overlay of our world, and anyway, the coming and going and the snatching and taking away into the Upside Down and everything. So it's I think that my understanding, my earlier understanding, that is earlier than 2 weeks ago, my earlier understanding of the Wraith world in Tolkien, I think had really influenced my reception of the Upside Down. But anyway, the point that Wyatt's making is it's not exactly like that at all. And even if we're tempted to think of it that way, one of the things that defines the Upside Down in Stranger Things is that it's not only a parallel sort of universe, but it's a corrupted universe in some ways. We don't get a lot of the sort of theory of the Upside Down in the series so far. But the idea that it's sort of twisted, that it's sort of dirty, sort of corrupted, is definitely something that you can see in the show. Wyatt's point is that if we're tempted to look at the Wraith world like that, right? And there is definitely temptation to think in that way, right? That this other world, this world that Frodo goes into, or at least partially goes into when he puts on the ring, this place where the ring wraiths already live full time, to see that as this kind of overlay of our world, but it's an evil place, right? It's the place of the wraiths. It's this sort of half-life into which you're drawn, right? I think that a lot of people, my sense is, I think that many people think of the Wraith world like that. Well, I know, because Peter Jackson seemed to think of it that way, right? The film depiction itself, and I don't mean, I'm not even thinking about all the people whose readings have been influenced by that depiction in the films, but even just the depiction in the films itself seems to suggest that kind of thing, right? Not that it's corrupted, it's not dirty, it's not like corroded, like we see in Stranger Things, but rather it's uncertain, it's misty, and distances are unclear, you can't really see anything, there's this like rushing sound, right? So all of the senses are strange, and you can see, after our readings, you can see, right, where Jackson was coming from, right? Where Jackson's team was coming from there. That is to say, Frodo with his friends looking distant, and the grayness, right, coming down before his eyes as he's being wraithified from his wound and everything. There's definitely some root in the text of that depiction, but it's not exactly, that's not a full picture, right? That's not really what it's like. Anyway, let me go on with Wyatt's explanation here. He says, the wraiths in this model are permanently in the other dimension, and only projections of their being bleed through into the main dimension. I don't like this interpretation, though, he says, mainly after we learn what Frodo sees of Glorfindel, as he himself is mainly in the wraith world. He perceives him as a bright, shining light. We don't get enough information to learn if this is unique to Glorfindel or if all elves possess this property, but it could suggest that the Wraith world is not necessarily an inherently evil place, but a neutral dimension that both the darkness and the light exist in. Exactly. Now, again, sort of adding to that, some of the things that we were looking at last time, we know it's not unique to Glorfindel, right? And it's not even exactly an elf thing intrinsically, right? It's a Valinor thing. Those who have dwelt in the Blessed Realm, Gandalf says, right? So elves, who the Morroquendi, the Dark Elves, the elves who have never been to Valinor, don't have it, right? They're not there. Glorfindel has because he has, right? He does because he has. He dwells in both places at once. And so that conclusion that we were coming to last time, that kind of remarkable conclusion that really sort of blew my own mind as we were sort of seeing this unfold together last time, was... I just along the lines that Wyatt is thinking here, but I would take it a good deal further, right? It's not only that it's not inherently an evil place. The sort of Valinor is that other place in a sense, almost, right? That's like the true home of that place, right? If you still live in both places, if you're here in Middle Earth, but you're still kind of also living in that other world, that other spiritual dimension, that's like holdover, right? Just from the influence that realm has had on you. And the way in which, of course, Valinor has been removed now from the world post Fall of Numenor, right? Really kind of emphasizes how it operates on a different plane. Tony, it is much more like that classic concept of fairy as a parallel plane to our own. It's not, I would not want to push that too far, right? That is to say, Tony, what I would not want, what I want to make sure nobody thinks I'm saying is that he's just talking about fairy, right? We can understand this as a fairy thing. No, I think it's parallel to it, right? Just as it shares elements with, fairy, right? Just as fairy, the boundaries of fairy are uncertain, right? And fairy can kind of overlap with our world, and you can be in our world and you can be in fairy at the same time and sometimes not, right? It's kind of uncertain. There are things that are similar between them, but this is definitely not Tolkien simply invoking the concept of the traditional concept of fairy. So back to Wyatt's final point there, a neutral dimension that both the darkness and the light exist in. Yes, sort of, right? I mean, yes, in that Glorfindel's there and the Wraiths are there, right? So yes, both darkness and light exist there. But I don't get the feeling that they necessarily have equal citizenship papers in that place, right? I think that there's a good reason why the Wraiths withdraw when Glorfindel approaches, right? And of course, in part, it's a light versus shadow situation, right? Shadows generally flee when light comes in. But I think that itself is sort of a symbol of a kind of a deeper thing here, right? The Wraiths are there. Yes, that's kind of their home plane now, right? They are, more of themselves is there in that spiritual dimension now than is in our dimension, right? They only have a much more tenuous connection. They don't have no connection, right? They still can wear boots and ride horses and hold knives, and speak and, creep out the gaffer and all that kind of thing. But they do have a kind of permanent residency there. But Tony, exactly, it's like they're trespassing. It's not really their home plane, right? What has happened to the Wraiths is unnatural, right? That's not what happened to, Wraithification is not the way it's supposed to go, right? That's not how... If you can think about the parallel, and this is kind of where we were ultimately going last time. Elves right? Born in Middle-earth, if they go to Valinor, they then live at once in both places, right? But for elves, that is like a fulfillment of their nature, right? An elf who dwells at once in both places is an elf who is enriched, right? Whose life and experience is enriched by getting both sides, right? There's Elvenhome and there's Middle-earth, where the elves were originally placed, right, by Iluvatar. I think it's fairly clear to me that both is good, right? That is, in a sense, I think, a fulfillment of the nature of the elves. That's how they're made to be. Not so with humans, right? Which, of course, the wraiths were. When the ring wraiths, right, when the 9 kings who put on the rings of power and become ring wraiths, when they got wraithified, when anything, right, human king or friendly hobbit gets wraithified, they are being dragged into that world, and it's unnatural. It's doing damage to them. Like it's not just that it does damage to them to be there. They're there because damage has been done to them. Like it is damage to them. So they're there, but again, they don't. That's not normal. That's not natural, really. Yeah. Fourth Dauntless, I've been thinking a lot about that. It is recalling the discussion from season 2 of the Silmarillion Film Project, when we were thinking about the question of is it actually good for the elves to go to Valinor? What is the real home and the real purpose and the real destiny of the elves? Now I was thinking about that a lot there. So anyway, so again, is both darkness and light there in that spiritual dimension? Yeah, definitely, right? But not necessarily on the same terms. Certainly not with Glorfindel and the Wraiths, right? Scudo, exactly. The Silmarillion does suggest that it was a mistake by the Valar to take the elves out of Middle-earth and bring them to Valinor. That's exactly what we were, but yet it's called Elvenhome, right? Anyway, we spent a lot of time talking about that for exactly those reasons. So let me keep going. I still haven't even finished reading Wyatt's comments here. Okay. So, he says, I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, that the glowing light is a property of all elves. Well, I don't think so, but it's fine. It's hard because he wrote this before we had this whole long discussion. I hadn't even thought of all these things myself before last time. What might be the explanation for this property? And why wouldn't hobbits or mortals appear as anything more than shadows in the Wraith world? One of the biggest distinctions in my mind that separates elves from men is their immortal souls. Agreed on that one. We know that elves, as the firstborn, have a spirit that will always remain in Middle-earth or Valinor. The mortal beings like the hobbits and men do not have this property. Yes. Could it be that the Wraith world is in some spiritual dimension that elves with their immortal soul naturally inhabit? This theory offers an interesting explanation for wraithification, the drawing of a mortal being into the immortal spiritual realm. Perhaps taking a finite mortal being and thrusting him into the spiritual realm is what accounts for the stretching. I think that's great. I think that seems to me almost exactly right, actually, Wyatt. Oh, good, Wyatt, you're here. I didn't see you before amidst all the other comments. Yeah, that I think that seems to me exactly right. The thing that we know, the number one thing that differentiates elves and men, right? The firstborn and the secondborn. It's not an immortality question, right? That's not, I mean, it's easy to say that. And a lot of people would say, if you ask people, right, you ask Tolkien fans, what's the number one difference between elves and men? most people will be like, well, the elves are immortal and the humans are mortal, right? Which is sort of true in a sense, but that's not really the thing, right? And this is where I saw some of you guys talking about the Athrobeth of Finrod and Andreth, which is in Morgoth's Ring, Volume 10 of the History of Middle-earth. That is like my second favorite thing. Leaf by Niggle is my number one favorite thing of Tolkien's. I mean, you know, the Lord of the Rings as a whole aside. The Athrobeth is like my second favorite thing of all of Tolkien's short pieces. Absolutely love it. And this is one of the things that they get into, right? Both elves and humans are immortal. The difference is, where's their home, right? For elves, you can debate whether it's Middle-earth or Valinor, but one thing's for sure, it's here, right? It's Arda. Elves their lives are bound to Arda. Their existence is coterminous with Arda, right? Arda is their place. They belong here. Humans don't, right? Humans visit here for a while, right? During the span of their mortal lives, and then they go somewhere else, the elves know not whither, right? So and in both places we're talking about their spirits, right? The bodies, both of elves and men, are sort of fungible, right? Humans leave their bodies behind and go off. Do they get other bodies elsewhere? Well, who knows? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Elves can recycle bodies. They can, rebuild bodies. You can do different things, but it's your fea, it's your spirit that really matters, that really defines you, right? The spirit of elves bound here to Arda, which again encompasses everything, Middle-earth and Valinor as well. And out there, right, wherever it is that humans go, their souls are there, right? So yes, when therefore, that seems to be the fundamental, one of the ways I think in which we can understand the wraithification process as this kind of fundamental violation, right? And in a sense, of course, it's like the whole immortality issue spelled out differently or thought through in a different framework, right? That is, we already know, right? It's a sort of a much more clear and obvious thing that seeking immortality is bad, right? Humans who try to cling on to life, that's not a good thing. And so we can all see part of the downfall of the nine riders, right? The 9 black riders. And of course we can see Bilbo's comment about butter stretched over too much bread, extrapolating to Gollum and then further extrapolating to the Ringwraiths, right? And they, the butter that they have left is exceptionally thin, right? But this is, I think, another way of conceiving this, which to me makes a really great deal of sense and helps me to understand this a lot better, right? So go back to Wyatt's characterization here. The drawing of a mortal being into the immortal spiritual realm is what wraithification is, right? And that's kind of, again, that's unnatural. That's not where their souls are meant to be. That's kind of rooting their souls here in that framework of Arda, right? Which is not where it is meant to be. Last time we were looking at how this sets up Frodo's healing and Bilbo's healing as well in the end, right? They have been exposed. They have been exposed to this world in this unnatural way. The ring has dragged them into this way, in a way which is disruptive, right? In a way which is destructive, because it's not their place, right? It's not where they are. It's not where they are meant to be. It's not how they are meant to be. How are they healed? By going to Valinor, right? By going into that other realm, in this different sense, right? Where men are not allowed, right? Men are forbidden from going there. And yet, they as mortals are given the grace to go. and that is the only way that they can find healing for the unnatural way in which they were dragged into it. They don't stay there. They don't live there forever. Sometimes, I mean, I remember being asked that question 10 years ago, right? A bunch of times. Does Frodo, when Frodo and Bilbo go to the Blessed Realm, does that mean that they live forever? No, it doesn't mean they live forever. They're still mortal. And I think a big part of being healed is being like they're being cleansed. They have this sort of cleansing experience in that other world, right? Which certainly, if it is going to set them right to rights, right? If it is going to, set their own sort of physical and spiritual ship going in the right direction, that direction is out of the circles of this world, right? So that's why I've often said I think they might have died earlier than they would have done. Frodo presumably could have gone on living. He was suffering, but didn't seem life-threatening, right? So anyway, a good. Rococo and Matt are thinking about the cleansing of purgatory like that. It is like that. I want to quibble. I don't think I'll quibble in detail. All I'll say is purgatory is about cleansing you of your own, like the consequences of your own decisions, like the correcting, like the faults that you have allowed to develop in your own character, right? It's about correcting your sins. This is about healing in a different sense. And again, the invitation to Bilbo and Frodo to come to the Blessed Realm seems to me to be about I don't want to say apology or to make up for things as if it was exactly the elves' fault, right? I'm not saying that, but they've had something done to them, which wasn't their plan, right? They didn't know what was happening to them. They didn't understand that when Bilbo finds his invisibility ring, right, he doesn't get the fact that he is doing this bad spiritual thing to himself, right? So they're offering to set it to rights. Anyway, Morrowind, I have always believed that their lives would actually be shortened by living in Valinor. Because again, I ask myself, what does the healing process look like? Or rather, how do you know when you're healed, right? When is Frodo going to be cured of his wounds? And I don't think it's when he becomes a happy and well-adjusted citizen of the Blessed Realm, because he's not. He can't be. He's mortal, right? It's not his place. Where Aragorn ends up, right? Aragorn's death scene, that is like the goal, right? The way in which he departs the mortal realm and goes to wherever it is that humans go, where the elves know not, beyond the circles of the world. That's how it's meant to happen, right? That is what a healthy soul of the second-born children of Iluvatar looks like, right? It's really the template right there. So, if Frodo is, when Frodo is healed, he's gonna die, and his spirit is going to happily, like Aragorn's, peacefully, gratefully go, right? Sorry, Boomful. I didn't mean to spoil Aragorn's death right there. Good. Okay. lots more we could talk about there. But thanks, Wyatt, and again, this is especially cool because Wyatt had posted all this before we had the discussion last week. I didn't want to talk about this before we talked about the passage, so I had this this question from Wyatt queued up to talk about right after we finished the slide last time, but we didn't get to it. But I was glad to start with it tonight so I can kind of review some things because I was still kind of grasping around a little bit last time. Yeah, Matt. Yes, exactly. Matt says a better parallel than purgatory, perhaps, would be the results of the Grail quest for everybody but Galahad. Yeah, exactly. Or even Galahad, right? Galahad and Percival both die, right? Galahad, of course, has his ascension experience. It's a little bit different, but anyway, yeah, definitely. Yeah, good. All right. Let us then return to the passage we were looking at. Here's the half a slide that I said we were going to get through today because, here it is. This is the slide we were talking about, the living at once in both worlds, the seen and the unseen, the white figure, which was Glorfindel, but we didn't get to the very end, there's some important stuff here. And Tony, you had mentioned this on Twitter yesterday, and I'm like, no way. There is absolutely no way that we're going to move on without discussing that line that Tony had mentioned. Absolutely. Which is, so last paragraph. Yes, you saw him for a moment as he is upon the other side, one of the mighty of the firstborn. He is an elf lord of a house of princes. Indeed, there is power in Rivendell to withstand the might of Mordor for a while, and elsewhere other powers still dwell. There is power, too, of another kind in the Shire, but all such places will soon become islands under siege if things go on as they are going. The Dark Lord is putting forth all his strength. All right. There are two threads that I would want to follow here. The first is that reference to the Shire. Gandalf is responding to the question, what about Rivendell and the elves? Is Rivendell safe? Right. And he's also, of course, immediately responding to the question, was that Glorfindel then? But remember, this is in the context of that question at the top of the slide, is Rivendell safe? And we talked about the double meaning of that question, right? On the one hand, it means, is Rivendell, like, are the Black Riders going to invade? Like, do I have to be looking over my shoulder? Are we safe here in Rivendell? But it also means, is Rivendell safe from betrayal? Is it going to be, remember we were talking about that context when he asks, what about Rivendell and the elves, right? Are they safe from Sauron? Are they going to, can they be corrupted? Can they be turned? What's going on? So he says, there is a power in Rivendell to withstand the might of Mordor for a while. So Rivendell is safe in that other sense as well. He answers the first one, the elves may fear the Dark Lord and they may fly before him, but never again will they listen to him or serve him. Don't have to worry about that, right? And also, in the other sense, there is a power in Rivendell to withstand the might of Mordor for a while. One thing, just small thing that I would emphasize there, and Tony, it's relevant to the other discussion, right, is remember that might doesn't always look the same way, right? Rivendell might not seem enormously defensible. I mean, okay, you've got a ford and you've got, mountain slopes and stuff, and it's a hidden valley, but it's not just by secrecy, right, that Rivendell is defended. There's no, awesome defensive fortifications, right, that repel evil. It's not how it works. Once again, we're reminded that the biggest battle is the spiritual battle, right? And when it comes to the spiritual side of things, Rivendell is a fortress. Rivendell is a bastion which even the enemy himself, should Sauron show up in person, he would not be able to enter Rivendell, at least for a while, right? To withstand the might of Mordor for a while. Not indefinitely, but it could do pretty well. And Tony, I agree. I do think that all that tra-la-la-lollying is a big part of it. Is it a coincidence that the elves sing their ridiculous song out there? Like, it's the first thing you see when you come into Rivendell, right? Is elves singing tra-la-la-lolly? No, I don't think that's a coincidence, right? Those folks were perimeter guards, right? You got to set up a good tra-la-la-lolly out on the edges, right, in order to make sure that evil cannot enter the valley. Anyhow, so Gandalf is emphasizing, yes, Rivendell is safe, right? There is a power here which makes it, the ringwraiths cannot come here. Evil does not enter into this valley, right? Irinda says, now I really want to see the Rivendell duty roster. Absolutely. Yeah. You gotta, get put on tra-la-la-lolly duty. Are there other duties, right? In addition to the singing and the baking of bannocks, do they do other things too? Is it like dancing? Pottery, like that. I don't know, painting, is that one of it too? I'm not sure. But yeah, there's all of these, all of this spiritual element of Rivendell, right? And yes, of course, the power of Elrond and of Vilya. We'll get back to that in a second. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I missed your name there, but I was looking at how the goblins also seem to set up their perimeters with their Black Crack song, right? Yeah, that's interesting. So, having established Rivendell is strong, right? It is a strong defensive position, but really primarily, possibly even only, in a spiritual sense, right? There is, let's think of that context when Gandalf then says there is power too of another kind in the Shire. The Shire is also a place of strength. So what's difficult to kind of tease out here, Gandalf has said simultaneously, there's a kind of parallel here, right? That Rivendell, just as Rivendell is strong, so the Shire is strong as well, right? Such places will soon become islands under siege if things go on as they are going, right? So they're similar, but he also explicitly says that they're different, right? That there's power of another kind in the Shire. It's not the same kind of power as is in Rivendell. So the trick is trying to figure out where the similarities lie and where the differences are, right? And I'm inclined to think that the difference does not lie in the I think that he's still talking about spiritual power. We know that the Shire is not invulnerable, right? That is, that evil does not come to Rivendell. Well, evil does come to the Shire. That we know, right? The ringwraiths can enter it as they seem not to be able to enter Rivendell. They didn't even want to cross the ford. They certainly aren't going to waltz down to the last and knock on the door of the last homely house, right? Asking for baggins and offering gold. So it's clearly different in kind, right? Gandalf doesn't say that the Shire could withstand the might of Mordor for a while, right? It probably couldn't. The Shire's probably not as strong as Rivendell, but again, I don't think it's just a question of quantity, right? Just a question of who has the most power. So power of a different kind. Again, I don't think it's simply a question of like physical power versus spiritual power. Both are spiritual power, but I think the qualities are different, right? And they certainly come from different things. I mean, okay, one comes from hobbits and one comes from elves, so to say they come from different things seems a little bit obvious. But that itself, I think, points to different things. Look at the strength in Frodo, right? The strength that led him to resist the power of the wound. Look at the way that the hobbits have been confounding the Witch King and his plans for weeks now, right? The way in which the Witch King and the Ringwraiths have had a heck of a time trying to make they thought this was going to be a lot easier than it turned out to be, right? And I still love that image of the two riders who hold back at the edge of the dell. Even when the Witch King is right there ordering them forward, they're not coming, right? There's power of a kind in the Shire as well, right? So when they are standing together by the fire, it's not just the fear of the fire, right? When the Ringwraiths are being routed out of Buckland, right, by the Bucklanders, there's power of a kind in the Shire. It is different. And so it's fun to think about. This would be a great paper, actually. What is the difference between the kind of power that's in Rivendell and the kind of power that's in the Shire, right? What do we see? What are the patterns that we can discern in the kind of spiritual power that the hobbits have versus the kind of spiritual power that the elves have? Anyway, really interesting and fun. But we're not going to solve that tonight. But this is one of the things that I definitely think is important to remember when you're trying to figure. And we've talked about a bunch of things, right? I mean, we've looked at so far every scene. Yeah, we've gotten them all. We have talked about every single time the Ringwraiths go into the Shire. So, in all of the Lord of the Rings, right? It's never going to happen again. So every single piece of evidence of a Ringwraith acting within the Shire we've discussed. And so when we talk about the difficulties that they've been having, we talked about this less back in chapter 3 than when we finally got up to like chapters 10 and 11. But one of the things that I often have emphasized over the years, when people want to ask, when people want to criticize, right? When they want to be like, I don't understand, why does Tolkien like sandbag why does Tolkien nerf the Ringwraiths, right? Why do the Ringwraiths how is it that they're thwarted in the Shire? How does the Ringwraith just stand there and like take lip off the gaffer, right? How would that happen? One of the things that I think is important to recall is what Gandalf says here, right? There is power in the Shire. It's not strong enough to prevent them crossing the border, but it's there, right? I do think that the Ringwraiths are weaker. Remember also Strider saying things like, in darkness and loneliness, is their strength, right? They're strengthened when they're together. They're strengthened when you are alone and frightened. When they are we see the difficulty they have in Buckland, right? They're not helpless in Buckland. They do have power. And we see them laying their own whammy on the house at Crickhollow, right? But we also see them flee away when the hobbits respond. It's not easy for them. So even when they're only confronted by people like the Gaffer or like Farmer Maggot, I say only as if those two gentlemen are not enormously significant and considerable in themselves. But I wonder, Catriona says, would that play into a reason why the wraiths that besieged Crickhollow had to stand around and concentrate for hours to build up enough mojo? Maybe. Well, Catriona, I'm not sure I would say it like that. I'm not sure that, like, it takes them twice as long to, work up the power of shadow, because they're operating at a disadvantage. Kind of like the hope and dread mechanic within Lotro, right? Where, except like in reverse, where the ring wraiths have like severe penalties because they're in a place where the hope is high, right? So they've got to overcome that, so they've got to buff up a lot before they can do that. I don't think that that's exactly how it works, but what I would say, Catriona, is that what I think we see them doing there is like, I was about to say isolating Crick Hollow, like obviously, they're sort of surrounding it, but they turn the house at Crick Hollow into a place that is like them, right? That is their kind of place. They sort of assert a kind of spiritual dominance over that place, right? And only after they've done that, only after they have filled that place with shadow and fear and horror and dread, do they invade, right? Remember, there's, I would add, I would extrapolate from Gandalf's comment, there's power too of another kind in the Prancing Pony, right? The Black Riders don't cross the threshold of that either. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, good. Yeah, good. Let's see. Yeah, I agree, Tony. They're being stronger in the wild. Seems to me not like, because, the forest and swamps are their natural environment, and therefore they have advantages. They get buffs from the environment there, but rather, again, it is the antipathy of the things that weaken them, right? Community, joy, peace, love, friendship, all of those things are against them. Exactly. Lincoln Aragorn says they're not going to invade the end unless they're truly desperate, right? Yeah, and it's an act of not quite desperation, but their attack at Weathertop at the Dell, even that's dodgy, right? And they're not in the Prancing Pony there. Yeah, I do like Bruce, that idea that they kind of turn the house at Crick Hollow into a little mini Morgul Vale. That's well thought of, right? When you look at what the Morgul Vale is like, that's the end state, right? It's not going to be quite that bad, right? They're not going to be able to do that in just a couple hours, but it's like what they do, right? They need to kind of put their own spiritual impression. They've got to make the environment, not physically, but spiritually friendly to them, right? To their point of view here. Exactly. And the wilderness thing, a lot of this seems to be about home and about community. So the strangeness of the wild and the isolation of the wild, those are dangerous things, right? And it's one of the things that makes Strider remarkable, because he's a ranger, right? He's an outcast, a vagabond, a wanderer. He has no home. He has no community that anyone can see. Now we know that it is not true that he has no community, but that's how it looks, right, from the Bree perspective. And yet he's able to foster it, right? He's able to build it. He's able to sing his song and to encourage the hobbits and help them to, stand by the fire and oppose the ring wraiths. Anyway, all right. Second point that I want to make about this second paragraph, or this last paragraph rather. Look at the way in which Gandalf's thoughts are going, right? The way that they are, the direction that they're pointing. He is already thinking about the war that is coming. Indeed, there is a power in Rivendell to withstand the might of Mordor for a while, and elsewhere other powers still dwell. In which case, he's probably thinking about Lorien here, but he might just as well be thinking about the prancing pony as well. Probably not, but it would still be true of it. There seems to be a kind of a transition in Gandalf's thinking, though, right? In the first half of the paragraph, he is primarily focused on the strength of Rivendell, the nature of elves, and the strength of and their strength, right? Glorfindel's strength against the Ringwraiths, and the strength of elves, the strength of Rivendell in general, right? But look how he transitions. So when he first says there's a power in Rivendell to withstand the might of Mordor for a while, he's making a statement about the power in Rivendell. How strong is it in Rivendell? Oh, they could withstand the might of Mordor for a while. But once he brings that up, it's like once Gandalf raises the specter of the might of Mordor being brought against Rivendell, that's the direction he starts to think, right? Notice how his thoughts seem to begin to move in that way. All such places will soon become islands under siege, if things go on as they are going. The Dark Lord is putting forth all his strength. The paragraph does not end up at the place where it began, right? I do think that we can see Gandalf's thought progressing, right? Moving along here. As he explains the strength of their allies, this inevitably leads him to be thinking not only about the strength of their enemy, but about the plans of their enemy. This is him saying, it's time, right? It's time. Come to think of it, the might of Mordor may come to Rivendell, right? The island, the Shire might become an island under siege. That's the direction things are going. The Dark Lord is putting forth all his strength, right? That's what the Ringwraiths mean. The fact that Sauron is, there are several things that it means, right? It means he knows about the ring, right? That he is now hot on the scent as he is hunting for the ring. He knows where to hunt for it now. But it's not just that, right? The fact that the Ringwraiths have come, the fact that they have emerged from Mordor means the day has come. A lot of, I forget whether it was here or somewhere else, relatively recently, I was discussing with a bunch of listeners about all the time that elapses. How there are all these long gaps on the tale of years, right? Where nobody seems to be doing anything. Sauron is gaining strength. And what that means, we'll talk about that more, I think, later on. But it is clearly a thing, right? It is clearly a thing that Sauron builds up his strength and when he deems himself strong enough, which is, I think, both physical in terms of armies and spiritual, when he deems himself strong enough, it's time to attack. The fact that the Ringwraiths have crossed the river, the fact that the Ringwraiths have invaded the West, he has sent them out, that means the time has come. He's going on the offensive now. He's not just waiting. He's not just gathering his strength. The Dark Lord is putting forth all his strength. That's significantly, yes, it is a declaration of open war, Tony. That's exactly it. Yeah, for Thoughtless is imagining Gandalf kicking himself after saying this. Of all the things not to say to Frodo when he's recovering from a mortal wound, this is probably top of the list of things you shouldn't be saying, right? Yes, a second darkness will be moving across the land any time now, right? Soon, everything you know and love and everything that you think is great or good is likely to become like an island under siege, right? Soon to be swamped under the flood of the dark tide of evil that is overcoming the world. So cheer up, Frodo, and get better, right? I totally hear you there. Belongsmon says the heart monitor is going beep, 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 beep. Yeah, exactly. Hold on to that thought, because we're going to we're going to come back to it. What I find fascinating here is what happens to Gandalf and what Gandalf does. But before we do that, let's look at a couple more questions which are related to that. First from Fourth Dauntless. A question from last week's class is, during this week's class, I was very troubled by the notion that Celebrimbor poured not only his own power, but that of the other elf lords into the Great Rings. I propose this as an explanation for the failure of elfdom in Middle-earth after the destruction of the One. I'm troubled because it implies that Celebrimbor forcibly extracted some of the spiritual strength or whatever of the other elves to make the rings. We don't see any evidence that this is possible, and it seems to me unlikely that Celebrimbor would have done this if he were merely deceived by Sauron rather than being entirely fallen. I prefer, and especially I would add, Fourth Dauntless, if the three rings are not corrupted, right? As we're told that they're not, right? At least Elrond claims that. I prefer to think that the elves could no longer maintain their separate realms within Middle-earth without the power of the three. Their power had waned as they exerted their strength to maintain these realms, and they chose to leave rather than to lose the beauty and peace of their land apart. Notice that we get no information that Thranduil's realm, which has stronger natural defenses, was abandoned at the same time of Lorien. Okay. All right, first of all, it was 2 weeks ago, which means I've already forgotten half of what I said last time. But as I recall, this is when I was responding to another question from the discussion boards about the externalization of power and all that stuff. And I am pretty sure, Fourth Dauntless, that I did not mean to imply that Celebrimbor was like extracting like part of Galadriel's soul and putting it into the three rings. I agree, that would be pretty bad, and I don't think so. So, this all opens up much bigger questions, which is going to lead me to my next slide, by the way. But so I'll come to that in just a second before we finish talking about this one, because it's about the same thing. But no, Fourth Dauntless, I think it's very likely that I've was quite unclear about that. So let me see if I can think this through more clearly. Sauron had to put his own strength into the ring. He had to weaken himself in order to do it, because he was attempting to attain mastery over the other rings, right? This seems to me a fundamentally different process. Well, okay, a different process, but it's got some similarities to what the elves do. So let's think about a couple things. First of all, we've already seen how when like a magical item is made, or what hobbits like Sam and gamers would call magical items, right, involve the spirit of the smith, right, putting some of his own spirit into the weapon, in the like the hatred of Angmar, right, and the desire to destroy the Witch King and his works is what is magic about Frodo's old sword, right? About those Barrow-down swords, as of course Merry is going to show later on. Spoiler. Anyway, so we've already looked at that. We've already talked about that. How that does seem to be, you put part in that sense. You put part of yourself into that. But there's another model. And here again, I have to kind of jump ahead to talk about this. Yeah, Trifle, I'm not going to jump back there. Trifle's remembering the Silmarils and Feanor's claim that they're tied to his life, right? That if the Silmarils are destroyed, that he, Feanor, will die. Trifle, the reason I don't want to go there is that I am not sure how much to believe Feanor. I'm not saying he's lying. I'm just not sure it's true, right? And this is an exaggeration. When a medieval courtly lover says to his lady that he'll die if she doesn't go to bed with him, it's probably not true. He might feel that way very sincerely, right? His saying that may be a very sincere expression of a very real emotion, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's objectively true. And Tony, I'm not sure that Feanor is right about that. Again, I think he's expressing something true. Is his life, in fact, tied up with them? Is there indeed some kind of real spiritual connection? I mean, are like the Silmarils, the Noldor and, Horcruxes of Feanor? I don't see much other than that one statement by Feanor, which is made at an impassioned moment where he seems really trying to make a rhetorical point about the Silmarils more than he is having an objective philosophical discussion about the spiritual nature of the Silmarils and their connection to him, the Smith, right? So anyway, I don't think in the end, I don't consider that a great data point. And Iwan Dillian, you're right. He's also kind of justifying his own behavior here. So yeah, this is why I kind of myself hear that all that with a grain of salt. But anyway, a better data point, I think a more relevant data point, is Haldir, the elves of Lorien, and the magic cloaks, right? So when the hobbits ask, are these magic cloaks, right? Remember what the elves say? That they put the thought of the things that they love into all the things that they make. So the magic cloaks act like they do because they have the thought of grass and stones and trees and everything in them, right? That seems to me different. If you're going to make a cloak and you're going to put not yourself, but like essence of tree, right? Essence of rock, essence of whatever, right? Into the cloak, you're doing something different. Certainly something very different from what Sauron does with the One Ring, right? Investing it with a large portion of his own power, of his own will, of his own spirit, right? So I see you guys talking about exploring the Silmarillion. I might have to appoint an heir before we get that far. I'll probably make it to 3031. I'm feeling pretty good about that. But who knows? Anyway, so Trifle asks him, I'm seeing a love versus self difference in what's being placed in the object. Yes, in a sense, I am. And that seems to me also to map onto the three rings. What's this power of the three rings? What are the three rings for? The three rings are for preserving unstained the things that the elves love, right? It is about those things. Right, so the power that's put into the three rings is, I think, not Celebrimbor putting his own or anybody else's power inside the rings, right? What the rings can do, the elves desire healing, right? The elves desire the healing and the preservation of these. Of the things that they love. We see this in Rivendell. We see this in Lorien as well, right? So is it, essence of, Malorn tree, essence of homely house, right? Something like that. That's essence of the jewel forges, of Celebrimbor and his people. That's what the power of the three rings is. Let me go on to the next slide. Amy's Revenge had a very similar discussion. And here he was thinking specifically about Sauron and Gandalf, but I think this really kind of approaches the same kind of question. Sauron and Morgoth invest their followers and or artifacts with some of their personal power. In exchange, they get more control over the minions, who become more powerful and act as hands or eyes for the Dark Lord or lords. What does Gandalf do in opposition? Is there some element of him drawing power from his followers, leaving them independent, and he becomes more powerful through the willing efforts of his team and the sharing of their pooled powers? It's not really like that. I'm still struggling to frame it. I'm trying to set them up as opposites, and even as unexpected opposites. The bad guys are the ones spending power out, and the good guys are the ones drawing power in, which on the surface is the opposite of what you'd maybe expect. Agreed, that does sound opposite, right? All right. I think the problem here, Mike, is that you're thinking about this in terms of a sort of a more literal opposite than it needs necessarily to be. Like, it's not opposite in the sense of in versus out, I think. I think it's different. It's not necessarily opposite. Yes, Lilith says, doesn't Gandalf support others emotionally, and that's one of his strongest powers, direct from Nienna? Yes. Now, one of the challenges with this here is, if we're thinking about the three rings and the power of the three rings, we have to differentiate the power of the three rings from the power of the wielders of the three rings, right? Gandalf's power, Galadriel's power, Elrond's power is not necessarily the same thing as the three rings. Indeed, the three rings, two of those three rings are hand-me-downs, right? They weren't even designed for those people. So it's hardly, you cannot say that Narya, least of all Narya, right? Least of all of Narya could you say that it is designed to be like an amplifier for Gandalf's personal power, right? So yeah, it's challenging to think about what Gandalf does and how he acts, and whether or not that is a result of the three rings. Is it him acting on the ring itself? That is he kind of channeling the power of Narya in a particular direction, which is different from, say, how Círdan might have channeled the power of that same ring? Belongsmont says Gandalf seems to be sharing and Sauron seems to be taking, which is, I think, exactly what Mike was saying at the end here when he says it's the opposite of what you'd maybe expect, right? When he was sort of saying that Sauron seems to be giving of himself. Giving is probably not the right word. Forcing of himself upon, right? What Gandalf, or what Sauron does with his followers is less like a gift and more like a rape, right? He's forcing himself upon them and dominating them with his will. Gandalf also has a relationship with people's wills. So I think that Mike is right to be opposing Gandalf and Sauron here, even thinking of them as opposites. I think that's right. Sauron is wanting to control, and Gandalf is wanting to empower, right, and build up. And Lilith, you're absolutely right. I was talking about how giving is not exactly the right thing, and of course, Lilith is reminding us that Sauron was a giver, right, a giver of gifts. That was his cover. And I think that's exactly right. A gift giver is a disguised assaulter. In his case, absolutely, right? What he tried to dress it up as a gift. Yeah, exactly. Valori's thinking of the same thing. So in what sense is what I'm kind of trying to circle back to? I'm trying to think of the elves in general, the three rings in particular, and Gandalf as well. He's not necessarily going to be this. Gandalf and Celebrimbor aren't necessarily going to be the same. Gandalf and Elrond, Galadriel, they're different, right? But how can we understand the difference between how those operate, right? So Mike just tuned in. Hey, Mike. Yeah, no, don't worry. I haven't missed anything. Yeah, it's all good. We've been talking about your slide here for a while now. Okay, but don't worry, we're not done. So, okay. So, how do we understand the difference here? Part of my problem is we don't have enough data yet, right? There's a lot of discussion, even just in the next couple chapters, that is over the next 18 months or so, about the elven rings in particular. We've not come to any passages about the elven rings explicitly and their powers yet, or very little anyway so far. So it's kind of challenging. But I think I want to come back to what we were talking about before about love, right? That example of the Lorien cloaks, right? Putting the thought of the things that they love into the things that they make. And even Feanor loved the Silmarils, and Celebrimbor loved the work that he did, right? And the elves love that which they seek to preserve, even if their acts to preserve it is not necessarily a great idea, right? I mean, I tend to think, personally, I think that all of the rings of power are a bad idea, right? Like the concept, categorically, rings of power are bad. I mean, it's a bad idea. That doesn't mean that I'm saying the three elvish rings are evil or corrupt. I'm just saying it's a bad idea. It's unwise, ironically, because of course it's the wise who thought of it and who hold them. But that desire of the elves to superimpose the kind of stasis on Middle-earth that they're trying to do, it's ill-advised. Right? I mean, that's not how it's supposed to be. It's a violation. They're not doing it right. Therefore, there is a significant sense, and here I'm coming back for Thoughtless to where you were coming back to in the end of your question in the previous slide, the fading of the elves and the destruction of the three rings. I don't think that the destruction of the three rings is bad. It's a tragedy in one sense, right? Because it brings change, and elves don't like that, and the fading of the firstborn is going to happen, but the fading of the firstborn isn't caused by the destruction of the rings, right? It's just the rings were being used to kind of stave it off unnaturally, which I'm not sure is a good idea. Right? The fading of the firstborn is kind of meant to happen. And I think that that's sort of okay. But yeah, yeah. Yeah, Trifle says he's going to go with a love versus power divide rather than love versus self, that is putting yourself into the artifact. I think the rings slide too close to power over love. There is an element of control in the rings of power, even the 3. I agree. I think that you can see, Elrond can say the Elvish rings are not corrupted. Right? They were not touched by Sauron. Yes, that's true. Sauron hasn't corrupted them. He does not directly control them. But it was still his idea, right? The idea of rings of power. Hey, make rings of power. Make rings which will enable you to control Arda, right? Control Middle-earth, or at least bits of it, right? It's a bad idea. I think it's a bad idea. So Celebrimbor does it, and he does a good job, right? And he makes good rings with good intention to try to achieve a good and noble thing. And they're in healing and preservation. There's nothing wrong with healing. There's nothing wrong with preservation, but there is something wrong with stasis. There is something wrong with asserting your own will. There's a kind of rebellion there, right? Who made the world to change? Right? Who invented time and the progression of time through? That's Iluvatar's kind of idea there, right? In saying, no, we're gonna push the pause button here, in at least this little bit of Middle Earth. They're swimming upstream against time itself, against the entire way in which creation is set up. I don't think that's a good thing. I think the destruction of the rings is good, even if the elves don't like it, because they did like what they appreciate the end that the 3 elvish rings were focused on. Yeah. Yeah, so Belongsmond, yes, I would say that the rings corrupt the natural order of things, because Belongsmond, you can connect that back to the other, right? The other thing we were talking about earlier tonight. The elves, the good rings of power, they're still good, but they're swimming against the tide of creation, right? Just as the rings, the 9 rings and the 1 ring in the hands of a hobbit, unnaturally mess them up spiritually, right? Push them into a spiritual place where they weren't meant to be. If the elves are swimming against the stream, as far as the order of creation is concerned, well, so are the ring wraiths, right? That's not how Iluvatar set things up. It's not supposed to be that way. Yeah. Yeah, Scudo, I think it's a good way of thinking about it. There were implications, there were consequences to the technology that Sauron taught them, which they didn't understand. Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay. All right. So Brunir is asking, would that be rebellion against the will of Iluvatar? That's a... Rebellion is a strong word, right? I would say... Here's how I think about it, Brunir. It's like Aule. What Aule did when he made the dwarves was outside the will of Iluvatar. It's not how it was supposed to go, right? The firstborn are supposed to come. Aule, you know this perfectly well, right? You've tried to create your own children like that, and that's above your pay grade, right? But he didn't do it for bad reasons, and he repented immediately, right? You, what Aule did was against the will of Iluvatar, and it was he was swimming upstream as well against, in his case, the expressed will of Iluvatar, right? But I would hardly call him a rebel against, I would hardly call that a rebellion against Iluvatar, right? That seems inappropriate. I'm feeling the same kind of way. I'm not saying that the making of the 3 Elvish rings is exactly the same. There's a lot of differences, obviously. But that's the similarity that I would say. Is what they're doing against the will of Iluvatar? Yeah, I think it is. But I don't think they're rebels. They're more like Aule than Morgoth, I think, when it comes to that. So, yeah. Depending on whether the elves have free will, Tony. Yes. Yeah. Depending on whether or not elves have free will. All right, I'm just going to say it. Elves obviously have free will. I know that the Silmarillion says that part of the gift to men is the freedom of their wills, and that there's a difference in the degree of freedom in the wills of men and the wills of elves. Agreed. And we would have to think very carefully through the implications of that, the theological and philosophical implications of that, and what exactly it means for the wills of humans to be more free and in what sense. But the idea that elves have no free will, that they enact without, that they have no ability to make moral choices on their own, is ludicrous. Like, that's a ludicrous idea. It is absolutely, you can't maintain that I don't think you can maintain that rigorously in the context of what happens in Elvish history, right? So anyway, yeah, I cannot square the concept of no free wills at all, right? No free will at all for the elves. I can't square that with really any part of the Silmarillion, but you don't even have to go to the Silmarillion, right? I can't square that with Galadriel, exactly, in the Lord of the Rings. Anyway, so to me, that seems an oversimplification. It's an oversimplification I've heard many people make, but it's, I think there's much more to it than that. So, yeah. But remember, we're not talking. This is me not talking about this. Okay, we're done. That's it. No more about the free will of the elves. So I just wanted to explain that I am absolutely operating under the premise that elves have some free will. The thing that I'm really not going to talk about is in what sense are the wills of men freer. Don't worry. When we get there, right? If we ever go back and do the Silmarillion after this, we'll talk about that. Don't worry. Okay. So, where does this leave us? Have we answered the question? I don't think we have. What is the answer to the question? How does the power, as it's exerted here, what is the contrast? Again, just as both Mike and Fourth Dauntless are thinking, good guys on one side, bad guys on the other side, them exerting their power. We can see some similarities. We've been looking at the kind of overlap here between the Elvish rings and the Sauron's rings of power. But there are clearly differences too. And with Gandalf. Well. It's so hard because we don't have it. Maybe we need to hold on to this and come back to it, because I think we need more data here. We've had a decent amount of data concerning the power of Sauron and the power of the ring, especially. Discussions with Gandalf, Frodo's own experience. We've seen a lot there. But we don't have much on the Elvish rings. We don't have much even on elf magic exactly. And we certainly have almost nothing about Gandalf yet. We have only once seen Gandalf really exert his power, and that was with Bilbo back in chapter 1. Does he exert his power with Frodo? I don't think he does, really. At least, again, not as we hear it discussed. Of course, we've seen Gandalf make fireworks and stuff like that. But anyway, I would want to see him in action more. Yeah, good, Scudo, you're right. We saw him, we heard secondhand, or we saw from a long distance, right? Him exerting power at Weathertop, absolutely. Here's the thing that I would remind you. Be cautious. Be cautious of the application of what is said about Gandalf in the Valaquenta and what is said about Gandalf in Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age in the Silmarillion. Be careful about applying those to the Lord of the Rings directly. Here's what I mean by that. Those are descriptive statements, not prescriptive statements. That is, those things are written after the Lord of the Rings. All of that is written after the Lord of the Rings. All that Gandalf stuff is after the Lord of the Rings. In other words, it's not just that it's chronologically past. Tolkien, after the writing of the Lord of the Rings, is himself looking at the big picture, right? Where do those statements come from? It's not like when... No, never mind. I could come at this a different way. When Tolkien says Gandalf's power is to inspire the spirits of others, right? He is not saying that was the idea behind Gandalf all along, right? The concept that informed the construction of Gandalf's character from the beginning was this, right? That's not what he's saying, because that's manifestly untrue, right? We know for a fact he wasn't thinking anything like that about Gandalf at the beginning. Certainly not in The Hobbit, right? And even not, I think, at the beginning of The Fellowship of the Ring. We can see that from the drafts, from the history of the Lord of the Rings. So we know that that's not the case. And Tolkien, unlike certain other fantasy authors I could mention, does not pretend that he always had all his final ideas from the beginning, right? What Tolkien is doing is not saying this is a key that you can use to interpret every passage in the Lord of the Rings. What he's saying is, I've been looking at all the passages in the Lord of the Rings, and this is the conclusion that I come to, right? He is describing the pattern that is visible in the Lord of the Rings when he is making those statements. He is not saying this is the secret code that unlocks the Lord of the Rings. Do you see the difference? I think the difference is very important. If we see it as prescriptive, right? This is the thing that underlies all of the statements in the Lord of the Rings, right? This is the sort of the true backstage fact of the matter, right? That underlies what Gandalf says and does, right, from the very begin onward. When you do that, you're always starting from that final description, and you're using that to guide your interpretation. Tolkien himself came at it exactly the other way around, right? He instead looked at all these passages of the text and says, what's the pattern? You can see this in his letters and things. This is how Tolkien approaches his text, right? The stuff that he did later in life was not, now I'm going to reveal what I was truly thinking, right? Rather, he's saying, now I'm going to show, where has the story brought me? What have I discovered, right? Both by writing the story and by reading the story afterwards, right? What have I discovered? Here's what I've discovered. Turns out, right, from having written The Lord of the Rings, I've learned that this is what Gandalf's power is, right? So what I want to do is I want to find the same thing, right? Because we can make mistakes and we can overlook things if we feel like we already know the answer, right? And we're bringing that answer to these early passages in the text where that answer, I think, was clearly not in Tolkien's mind. So anyway, that's why I always want to be careful about that. So do we have any reason to believe yet that Gandalf's involved in inspiring the spirits of others? We've seen him be encouraging to Frodo, right? But we've seen Strider do that too, right? So again, we have to be careful. I think it's much more fun if we can arrive where Tolkien arrived, in the way that he arrived there, right? Rather than acting like the destination was always in sight from the beginning, because it wasn't, even for Tolkien, right? And I don't think that he would want us to not have that same experience of discovery, right, as we go through. So anyway, okay. All right. So let's, rather than trying to force myself to come to a conclusion here, like I'm not going to come to a conclusion here, right? Let's leave this as an open question, which we will return to at various points. What is the difference between, using Galadriel's terms, right? The difference between what the elves do and the deceits of the enemy, right? Hobbits call them both magic. The elves don't like that, right? Why not? What's the difference exactly? All right. Well, I started late, but we're running out of time, so I should not keep everybody too late here tonight. We did the passage I wanted to talk about. Don't forget, we're going to come back as a transition into here. I'm coming back to, having thought about all of this, I'm coming back to the question that we were looking at here about the Dark Lord putting forth all his strength, where Gandalf goes in this conversation. What happens to Gandalf next is really cool. So looking at the reactions, we'll see both Gandalf's reaction and Frodo's reaction to what's going on here, right? To the sort of state that Gandalf works himself into, right? So anyway, we'll look at that next time. And that's going to be fun. Meanwhile, it's field trip time again. Time to go back to Rivendell. So let's do that. Let's go back to Rivendell.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. So I'm going to say goodnight to the Twitch. No, not the Twitch folks. The Twitter folks.
Twitter?
Yep. Twitter folks, right. Thanks, everybody, for joining me there. Come and join us at twitch.tv/SignumU if you would like to join us on Twitch. So thanks, everybody, on Twitter. And I will see you guys next week. Okay, there we go. All right.
But yeah, you're talking like, Tolkien's process for the Silmarillion being... can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. This process for the Silmarillion was, some of it he had written beforehand, because he'd been
absolutely
working on this since his 20s, of course. But, the final-ish version was more like you said, extrapolating from what he wrote, what I discovered while writing it. It's kind of like what we do. We go into the game and we look at what's been put here and we go, okay, why is it here and what have we learned?
Right.
It's taking
Exactly.
existing data.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, when I'm talking about Tolkien discovering things and the Silmarillion stuff coming after, I'm speaking primarily about the Gandalf material, right? The stuff that's like of the Rings of Power in the Third Age and the parts of the Valaquenta that talk about Gandalf. That's all. This is not the secret backstory of Gandalf, right? I mean,
No.
it is chronologically within within Middle Earth, right? But it is certainly not what lies behind the Gandalf that we meet in The Hobbit and in chapter 1 and 2 of The Lord of the Rings. Rather, it is the conclusion that Tolkien came to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, Gandalf's one of the easier ones. I mean, look at Galadriel.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I think we can head off Rivendell ways.
Yeah, head to
while we continue to talk.
Absolutely,
but no, exactly. Galadriel, he had, there's a lot that he hadn't worked out with Galadriel. But see, I think the difference there between the Gandalf and the Silmarillion and Galadriel and the Silmarillion is that Galadriel, what she was sort of known, right?
Yes.
It's not really a question of trying to figure out what she is exactly. There was a question of her history. How did she get to where we see her, and what exactly does it mean? But it's not really a question of what she is. Whereas with Gandalf, it really very much was, right? I mean, almost from the beginning, okay, he's a wizard. What does that mean? What is a wizard exactly? And, one of my favorite moments where I think we see, there's an almost a kind of a meta fictional moment, right? When Pippin wonders, what is Gandalf anyway, and when did he enter the world, and what is
when did he enter the picture?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like it's only at that moment that Tolkien himself starts asking that question, of course, but again, it was clearly a question that Tolkien's answer had been changing to. Even
in The Hobbit, there are so many what are the extent of his powers? What is he capable of doing? He's just this Odin Vainamoinen kind of traveling old fella guy, just
right, exactly. Yeah. So it's all of that he was really working out. So with Gandalf, he does need a history, but his history is simpler, in a sense, than Galadriel's history. Simpler because it doesn't have to impact all of the rest of society, right? He's not a lord. He's not ruling anything. He doesn't have to be fit into the political history of Middle Earth, right? He's been a wanderer. So how did he get it? Where did he come from? And how did he get to Middle Earth? And what was his job? Those things you need to figure out, right? But
the answer is Gandalf, Gandalf, and Gandalf.
Yeah, exactly. But with Galadriel, of course, the main challenge was figuring out how does she fit into the stories, and of course, in a special, not only fitting into the stories of Middle Earth, but how does she fit into the ancient stories, right? She has to have been around for a long time, right? So, whose kid is she, and how was she connected with those other stories?
Immortals are so difficult to just think of. It's just so beyond human comprehension.
Absolutely, yeah. It's very tricky. Definitely very tricky. Okay. All right. So 2 weeks is a long time. Where were we? We had gotten as far as the marketplace. Isn't that where?
Yes, we were looking at. We hadn't got to the marketplace yet. We got distracted.
Okay. Yes.
As happens. Sometimes.
Okay.
We were distracted by doors of no function.
Right. Right. Yes, Luke is recalling when Gandalf says in The Hobbit, "I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me." Yeah, that's pretty much the answer, right? At the beginning. But yeah, we don't get much else. Okay.
Okay, yeah, so that we passed the Spire of Meeting, and I think we were heading towards the Mercantile.
Right. And we had come over here, and we were looking at this gazebo. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and the purpose of these towers is you cannot get to.
Right, yes, the towers with the lights. Right.
Which led us up to here into the market.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, we're on Arkenstone tonight.
Yes, Arkenstone tonight.
That's where we are. Okay. So, this is the market. Who is the market for? Who's meant to buy things at market?
Well, the travelers coming through, definitely.
Well, except the only travelers coming through that we've seen who seem to have any interest in mercantile exchange are the dwarves, who are in a completely the other side of the valley, right? And who don't come up here. Now, you could say it's because they're selling, not buying, right? And if they were buying, presumably they would come here. But
well, look at the sort of things they're selling. They're selling armor and they're selling weapons.
Yeah.
So if you're a dwarf traveling back and forth with beautiful, textiles or toys or things from the Long Lake or something like that, then, that's something you might not have as much or have worn through on your journeys.
Right. See, Scudo, but this is exactly what I find interesting about the depiction of Rivendell. Scudo's saying we're bumping up against the distinction between a realistic depiction of the world Tolkien created and a game adaptation of that world. I agree in one sense, in that I know that there are sort of internal pressures, right, from the fact that it's a game environment, but that don't necessarily have anything to do with an adaptation of Tolkien. But I deny that explains the marketplace entirely. Like, yes, it's true that we have to have elves who sell things, right? Because, we're player characters and we might need light armor, right? So I might need to purchase light armor from a person. So there needs to be a person who's selling light armor. Absolutely agreed, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be a big old marketplace, though. Especially since we have examples of some of these things squeezed in pretty randomly in other places in Rivendell where we don't, so I'm thinking of the Vault Keeper on the ground floor of the Last Homely House, just hanging out in the atrium, right? Is there a vault? There is a Vault Keeper there, isn't there? Am I remembering that correctly?
In which one again?
In the Last Homely
the
House
entrance.
On the ground floor?
Yeah. Yep, Vault
Keeper,
just in the entrance there.
Yeah, so, I mean...
So why is he there and not here? That's a question.
Right. And why are these here and not there is really what I was kind of getting at, right? Like, we don't need all these buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could... They've made the choice to include a marketplace. And I would add, not only have they made the choice to have the marketplace, think back to the skirmish camp. Now, I know skirmish camps are a thing, and all of the skirmish camps look alike. So I'm not trying to say that the skirmish camp could be the model, but in a sense, it kind of could, right? That is, if they wanted to they could make the choice to say, all right, like, a marketplace is a necessary evil because we need a bunch of people selling bunches of different things, right? So let's, since we have to have a place where a bunch of elves are selling things, it might as well be a marketplace, but it doesn't have to be. And it certainly doesn't have to look like this. Look at this thing.
They could have made it look like the dwarf auction hall and made them all dwarfs who were just passing through.
Exactly. They could have, they have dwarf merchants, right? They could have made us go to the dwarves to buy things, right? And have the elves not sully their hands with, mercantile practices, right?
Well,
they didn't.
One thing I am noticing here, all the vendors are military.
Right, they're all wearing armor, right?
Yeah, well, they're all wearing armor and the military crest of the area.
the crest, the ones that we saw by the
Which
bridge,
makes you think,
right?
like, this is less of a market than this is, like, an armory.
Right.
They're just, like, this would normally be free to all Rivendell, army citizens or something like that.
That is interesting. To think of this as less the armory than, or less the marketplace than the armory. It has kind of become the marketplace, or like to us it is the marketplace, but that's why they have this thing. So again, like in their adaptation here, the game designers have made the choice as they have chosen to articulate Elvish culture through the building of Rivendell, which is what we've been examining for the last several sessions. They made the choice not only to have a marketplace among the elves, but to make it very grand. I mean, this is bigger than any building
completely inaccessible. We can't go inside.
And we can't go inside. Yeah, there's no doors in. That tower is taller and more elaborate than any other tower we've seen. Those spires down next to it too, right? That's really different.
It really does make me feel like the armor sellers are a last minute addition. Like, these are the guys who set up camp outside the market.
Right.
No. Notice how none of them are actually inside the, what you would call the marketplace. They're just sort of camped outside, on various daisies and steps and underhangings and stuff like that.
Right.
Like, this is a new concession that is made due to all the weapon-minded people currently passing through.
All of a sudden, Rivendell is just overrun with folks who need like weapons and armor, right? So and who are coming to them with boar tusks and lynx pelts and things like that to be made into armor and weapons.
Consider how many of us get personal errands from Elrond in the first place.
Right.
How maybe this is just let's they're under orders from the master. Let's help them out here. Right.
Yes, exactly. So this is them coming and setting up a sort of a spontaneous shop, as you say, like these banners, right? That they're I mean, it's not like these are permanent banners.
No, these are temporary banners. I bet on the inside there's signs for stores that have been there for centuries, that have been carved into the stone. Right,
exactly.
Well, this is just wooden tables and shelves and mannequins.
Yes, that they've kind of trundled out onto the sidewalk here in order to get to offer to us who are not allowed to go indoors.
Yeah, maybe we're not privileged enough to go in. I get the feeling like, if we, could magically see in, it would look something a little more like a grander version of Lalia's market.
Yeah, maybe. Especially when you think, and here's the other thing, right, about the whole concept of marketplace. We know there are a lot of high elves in Rivendell, which means, to say the same thing another way, there are a lot of Noldor who live in Rivendell, right, as we have already kind of been discussing. That is, there's a lot of people who really love making things. We know this to be not just a Noldor trait, though they're
look at the building.
Known for it. Exactly. So I wonder what the Elvish concept of marketplace was. Could they have, and thinking, and this is now where I'm coming back to the grandiosity of the buildings here, right?
Oh, like a hoity-toity version of a craft show swap meet kind of thing?
Yeah, that is kind of what I was thinking, I think. Exactly. Yeah. The big Noldorin swap meet.
Vanderbilt swap meet.
Yeah, that's just more or less exactly what I was thinking. That this would be the place where the elvish craftsmen display the things that they've made, right? Which would be a really big deal, which would explain why this is like more cathedral than shop.
Mm-hmm. Also, how we're kind of not invited in. It's definitely one of those. What are you going to bring to the table?
How we're kind of not invited in. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I made a popsicle stick man.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has googly eyes.
Exactly. So yeah, that seems to me to work. Now keep in mind, oft repeated disclaimer, when we say these things, I'm not saying that, I'm sure this is what the developers were thinking when they made this. I am in the delightful position of not having to try to guess exactly what they were thinking, but rather draw conclusions about the adaptation that they have made, right?
Mm-hmm. And there were some decisions here, like to make a building we couldn't go into.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the consequences of those decisions that we've been considering that make a lot of sense. Well, now let's move on to the related area, which is the crafting center around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we come over here.
Oh, these guys are plain clothes.
We've got another bridge. But then we come around down by the river, in through the gap in the rocks.
Down by the old mill stream.
And in here we get...
Yeah.
The Forges of Rivendell. So we have the
building. The Forges.
Relatively plain building. Plain compared, certainly,
Hang in there.
Yeah, sorry. I'm still... I think
jet lag.
A little bit of jet lag still dealing with here. Midnight feels later to me than it usually feels because I'm still coming off of Europe time. But anyway, the house looks, well, not totally plain, but less ornate. Is it less ornate than the...
I don't know if it's less ornate. It does remind me of the ones that you get in the homesteads.
Yes.
In Falafelin.
Yes. All right. And then, of course, over here we have this. These are the forges.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hemildir, the main smith here, who's going to prove of immense importance in the quest lines.
Right.
Ooh, he's making a shield. See, once again, we're just more weaponry.
Yes.
WEAPONRY weaponry. This beautiful sword. This is. No, it's not a. What is that? No, it's not a sword because it's halberd.
Yeah, I think it is a pole arm.
Yeah, it's some kind of pole arm. Decorative or functional or both, maybe. Knowing the Noldorin, both.
Yeah, exactly. What's to choose between the two of them?
Well, that'd be hard to get blood out of. You need like a Q-tip.
Let's see.
There's a beautiful Elbereth overall.
Yeah, I'm stuck. All right. And she's got another similar, not exactly the same pole arm over here, and she's whittling a pole. Okay. All right. The fact that another shrine of Elbereth looks over this, is there... Do we have
it's
another
definitely a jeweler's paradise then.
Yeah.
Oh, do I remember these where? I'm pretty sure they were doing in very special like shrines. That didn't seem to have any other purpose. There was one. I think there was a forge similar to this in Kilondon.
Right.
but I don't know if it was on this scale. It was definitely much smaller.
Yeah, I mean, the Elbereth shrine we've seen at this scale in the, in the atrium of the last Homely House. In that first.
Well, that was even bigger. Those are towering, but yes.
That for polearm. I'm reading polearms here on the Twitch chat. In that first courtyard. But it's interesting that they have a similar. So when we were looking at that other very striking statue or shrine or icon of Elbereth, we were noticing, of course, the purple flames that are set out like votary flames at the feet of Elbereth in that shrine, if shrine is quite the right word, within Rivendell. Here, the forge itself, the forge fires, are at her feet, like, votary flames at the feet of Varda. And that's kind of interesting, actually. It suggests that their craftsmanship itself, and it's really, this is the Forges of Rivendell, is what I called it the crafting area, but that's not exactly right. It only talks about
smithing
forges,
and workbenches.
Yeah, exactly. Which means that the heart of this whole area is the fire, right? The fire that is there at Elbereth's feet.
It's almost like the act of creating beautiful things is in it of itself a holy act to be blessed.
Exactly. When you look at it from here, you could be forgiven for thinking that this was a shrine or a church or something like that, right? And if so, the forge is in the place where the altar would be. It is like, and I don't want to get too detailed with that parallel, but there is a sense in which here the forge is like the altar, at that central point in the nave, and where the in a Christian church, right, where the sacrificial gifts are laid upon the altar, in sort of the Christian version of that. Here we have the
censer smoke everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Here we have the steel, the metal of the materials that they're using to forge are laid within the forge.
A different kind of chiming.
Exactly. A different kind of sacrifice, right? A different kind of concept here.
It's a sacrifice of self and of heart and time spent.
Yeah, which is interesting. Now, Trifle, I agree. We do need to pay attention to the Forges of Eregion when we get there and compare. In fact, I think we might do a little detour there sooner rather than later to do some comparison, because that really sounds like quite a good idea.
And it will also weigh the question if there's a forge without it, is it an Olduran forge?
Right. Yeah, I would be interested to see how similar or different the forges in Eregion are. And
if you played through the Tasta, the momentous decision that leads to the forging of Narsil, and see the animation in this area, it is almost a reverent and holy ceremony as they're reforging this sword.
Yes.
It's like, what a better setting for that.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. That's a really important point. The whole ceremonial of the forging of Andúril, it's very reverent. You're right. And it gives a sense, a kind of sanctity, sacredness to Andúril itself. Yeah. Anyway.
And it being blessed by Varda, his mission being blessed.
Yes, exactly. So, that seems like an important thing. And that is, an interesting difference between what we see here in the forges and what we were looking at in the marketplace, right? Now, those are different, obviously, right? There's a difference between the place where the forging and the crafting is happening and the place where the goods are displayed, right? In one sense or another, the marketplace is a showcase, whereas this is where the magic happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. I think this is good. I'm happy with our marketplace conclusions and looking at the forge here. Sorry, now I'm looking at the shape of things here. Anyway,
it's a beautiful set. Beautiful set.
And the water. That it's set above the, this very peaceful little arm of the river. Let's see, where are we?
Oh, swimming in the peaceful water.
Yeah.
Ruining our view.
This is
they're going over the files.
This is also the source of at least of this branch, right? Yes. Nothing flows into this. No waterfalls are coming down from the top. And if you look at the map, this looks like this is the beginning of that water, unlike the other places where we see it flowing out or flowing in.
It's a new beginning.
Yeah. So this pool next to the forge is a spring, which is also lovely, right? So we've got memories of Olmo here too, perhaps you could say. I like that. That.
The only thing we don't have is Owly.
Yeah,
who would seem to belong here.
Owly, right? Unless you say the forge itself, right?
He's in the forge itself.
Right, exactly. At least recalled by it. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I think I'm going to have to call the field trip. I'm getting very sleepy. My jet lag self. I'll have to. I should be in. I should be better next week. But no, this is good. I think that we've covered most of Rivendell now.
Yeah.
Not quite all yet. We still have a little bit left, but
some corners.
Quite a bit. Yeah. We still haven't gone up to Arwen yet, so we'll do that soon.
And the rep hall might be an option if you have a tune that has reputation.
Yes, exactly. I would love to go in there. We should go in there, one way or another. But yeah, I don't think I know Narnian doesn't have it, so yeah.
That'd be a Landreval one.
Yes, it would. All right. Okay. So, thanks everybody. Yeah, quick reminder, as Sharon is posting, don't forget to check out Mootcast, our new way to attend MythMoot Live if you can't make it. signumuniversity.org/mythmoot/mootcast. Definitely check that out. So, thanks everybody for joining me tonight, and I will see you guys next week. Bye now.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks for joining me on this epic exploration of The Lord of the Rings and of Standing Stone's video adaptation of Tolkien's story. If you are having even half the fun I'm having on this journey, I hope you will consider supporting the project by donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.